How you guys doing today? It's Anthony Gangi. Welcome to another episode of Tier Talk. Guys, great discussion today. We're going to talk about 7 ways assumptions impact the workplace dynamic. I want you guys to know assumptions is pretty much the root of miscommunication and misunderstandings. So, I mean, pretty much the basics of our dialogue is going to fall into some level of miscommunication or misunderstanding. It's a very timely discussion because I think that assumptions are probably the main reason why we have a divide in the workplace, among other things. And we're going to cover 7 areas of impact when we are leading or moving forward with assumptions. And I definitely, as I said, guys, I definitely think this is definitely a timely and needed discussion. My guest today is going to be Joe Pomponio. I'm looking forward to having this dialogue. Hey, guys, but real quick, some books on the market. We have Inmate Manipulation Decoded. This book is used in training all across the country. I'm very happy with this book's success. If you guys haven't read it, you should. The link to this book is in the description. It's available on Amazon. And we also have Tips for New Correctional Officers and Their Supervisors and How to Succeed in Corrections. Guys, these 2 books are just have tons of knowledge and how to navigate corrections and making sure it's a successful career. I mean, the tips don't just come from me. It comes from many other people in this profession. Now, this book is written by me, published by Blue 360 Media, and the link to that, or these 2 books, are in the description as well. Guys, if you haven't, definitely get your hands on this book. Get your hands on all these books. Let's just say that. And then I have another book coming out soon about managing inmate behavior. It's in the editing process now. Maybe thinking about self-publishing that so I can keep the book at a cheaper cost. And I'll let you guys know that shortly. I'm working with the editors now to figure out what I want to do. Okay, so let me go ahead and bring on Joe. What up, Joe?
Hey, morning, brother. How are you?
Yeah, doing pretty good. Good to see you on this great Saturday morning. Happy Memorial Day weekend.
Yeah, you too as well.
Thank you, sir. Joe, you mind introducing yourself to the audience, please?
Absolutely. My name is Joe Pomponio. I'm a retired lieutenant from the Texas Department of Corrections of 29 years. Currently working as an assistant jail administrator in our local sheriff's department jail division and a panel member here for Tier Talk.
Yes. And Joe, I think this is a good timely discussion. We did a live the other day, and I do believe there are a big divide comes from making assumptions, thinking that we know things when we don't. And I think this will be a good discussion. Do you think it's timely, without going into too many details, because we will be going in shortly, do you think this discussion is timely and could have benefits?
Oh, absolutely. You know, assumptions are massive. They could have positive or negative effects. So, yeah, definitely.
All right, cool. Now, again, guys, let's just do this first. I actually have assumptions equating to overall miscommunication. I was reading a little bit to try to come up with the 7 thoughts. And when it comes to communication breakdowns, when people assume others understand their intention, it can lead to confusion and conflict if those assumptions are incorrect. This can strain relationships and cause miscommunication. So we may revisit this again briefly when it comes to the divide part. But I think right now, guys, when we have this divide and we have this actually, might as well just start with the divide, because it's going to bleed into each other. When let's say me and Joe don't really get along, Joe's my supervisor and I'm just not feeling Joe. I don't like his style, whatever it is. And me and Joe just don't seem to get along. Joe, as let's say my supervisor, can give me orders. And even though the orders are legit, my assumption about Joe's motives behind those orders, I think that's the big part of the divide. Is it's not so much what we're being told to do, but rather what we believe to be the motives or the intent behind what we are doing. So granted, Joe gives me a directive, fair directive, but because I don't like Joe, it has nothing to do with the directive. I start to assume his motives behind those directives, his intent behind those directives. And instead of me confronting Joe on those issues, I just let the assumptions grow and grow and grow. And then the biggest concern here is that my relationship with Joe actually gets a lot worse because we are starting to self-fulfill the prophecy. And what do I mean by that? It means that now our relationship, our interactions are really based on assumptions. Joe gives me a legit order. I assume he's being an asshole by giving me that order, and it just furthers divide instead of us just actually communicating with each other and, maybe discussing what those assumptions may be just for clarity's sake. But Joe, I got to mention this to you. I think, even though I kind of made it a very specific example between me and you, or in this case, let's say a lieutenant and an officer, however you want to work it, but this also carries out between departments, across all levels, across all ranks, because at the end of the day, this generalized animosity could start between me and Joe. Here, I'm an officer. I don't get along with Joe. He's my lieutenant. And then when I go to talk to the other officers, I'm just like, management's got it out for us. Now I got, management on my back for this. And next thing you know, a problem between me and Joe that could easily be handled now becomes a problem between frontline and management. And that dynamic can also carry out across the board between different departments that need to interact with each other. So assumptions, Joe, I really do think assumptions are based on what we feel the other party's motive is or their intent. And now the problem is, and I'm reading a book now called High Road Leadership. I think the problem is that even if we may disagree on something, because it's okay to disagree, it's never okay to be disrespectful, but it's okay to disagree. Now the problem is I'm viewing Joe or I'm viewing the higher level department, whatever I can relate that assumption to not having a disagreement, but rather it's this department or this person is just a disagreeable person. What's your thoughts on all this, Joe?
Yeah, I mean that's something that commonly happens all the time. Me and my wife just had this discussion the other night because she felt that her supervisors is picking on her because of the fact that she's sent to the hospital all the time for hospital duties whenever inmates are being sent to the hospitals. And I kind of had to stop her. I was like, is he picking on you, or is it because he feels that with 20 years in the system that you're a veteran and you can actually handle the job and do it professionally, look professionally? And she kind of had that flash moment. So and again, it was all based off of personal beliefs or what she thought was a hidden agenda. And the bad part about that is once you start to believe it yourself, you start to share it with others and others start to buy into that. And that's where the divide starts.
Yeah. And I got to say something, guys. There's, I took a couple of quotes, but it says making assumptions can be especially problematic in our relationship with others. We tend to assume we know what other people are thinking and feeling when in fact our assumptions on this matter could be completely misplaced. I think that's where the concern is, Joe. I think the concern right now is that, especially between departments on a higher level, is that we assume the motive, we assume the intent, and then we pass those assumptions down to the people that are closest to us. And then now we wind up having this divide that truly is not based on any fact. It's just based on an assumption of what we feel someone else is thinking. And the reason why I think people do that is because it's easier to garner support than it is to face the conflict and realize you could be wrong. So here I am, I have a disagreement with Joe. I'm going to go quick and get everybody on my side about what I feel Joe is doing. But Joe just had a simple order. Maybe there's just not an understanding of what that order is. So now here I am looking for support. But again, Joe's not presenting any counter influence here. I'm just building support. And now next thing you know, we got this generalized animosity between two departments. And the sad thing about it all is that the longer this festers, the longer this assumption carries weight, people start to find personal justification in why they feel a certain way without any validation of any facts or whatever it is. Yeah. So again, I like to put a little bit of a solution here, but when you start to assume motive and you start to assume intent, especially if those motives or intent truly conflict with what needs to be done in those operations, I think that should motivate you to now go talk to the individual, because it's okay to have conflict. I mean, it's over an issue and idea. As long as there's some trust between us, you got to have trust. And then you try to nip it out. And then I'm going to tell you something. moment you're able to do that, the moment I'm able to, you know what, let me go talk to Joe, see what he wants. When me and Joe finally have that talk, we finally realize that we don't really hate each other. It's just these assumptions that have gone wild when at the end of the day, we should have had this conversation a long time ago. But Joe, would you agree, Joe, that it takes more intentional effort to have that dialogue, to see what needs to be understood, to see what that clarity is, and then try to move forward at least with an understanding of why things are happening or why things need to be done?
Yeah, I mean, and that's the way it should be. I mean, it's, as sad as it is, it's, people find it easier to garnish the hatred and spread the misconceptions than it is to, walk up front and talk to the person one-on-one and get the reasonings and ideas behind it. It happens all the time, especially in a correctional setting. Every time a facility gets a new warden, we all know that new wardens come in with their own pet peeves and things they like to see. And sometimes things get changed because that's the way that they're actually supposed to be to begin with, and people don't understand it. And rather than go up front and have that discussion, they garnish the hatred and spread the misconceptions and try to get people on board with it. We say it all the time. Communication is key. It doesn't matter what aspect of the job you're doing. Even in your personal beliefs, if you feel that you have an issue, go talk to the person. 90% of the time you'll find out that, just by simple communication, you'll find out that the picture that was painted to you isn't a true picture.
And guys, to be honest with you, this is pretty much the center of today's dialogue, because we wanted to make sure that gets out there. That's pretty much the most, out of all the things we're going to discuss, and yes, we are going to discuss some other important things, I think this really does have a priority, because this does affect how we are engaged with each other. And actually, might as well get to the next part because it bleeds into it. It can cause the team to break down. At this point here, what you have here is assumptions can prevent dialogue and innovation, which can lead to team breakdown. If we have a divide, that means we're not utilizing our collective intelligence. That means that we are literally working in isolation or in silos. And the funny thing is the divides at the highest levels truly do affect those at the lowest of levels, because they got to wind up managing these gaps. But with that said, you also could see at the bottom level too, where people just don't seem to get along with each other. And then I think sometimes it takes management to have to sit these people together and say, you guys are going to have to talk this out, because at the end of the day, I want professionalism in the workplace. Now, granted, I mean, sometimes these personal matters become EED matters, which is just really just a whole nother avenue, especially if it really doesn't fall into those categories. It's just people that aren't getting along. But eventually, when it's safe to do so, you have to have these people communicate with each other and not be afraid that there's going to be conflict in the room. Because at this point here, when we start bringing you together, you're going to be held accountable for being professional. It is what it is. But having said that, it does cause a divide, because if you're not communicating with each other, the team itself is not working at its best effectiveness, which means that we're not sharing thoughts, we're not sharing insights, and we're not really working together to move things forwardly. To move things effectively forward. I mean, I love it when all departments get along. I love it when management and frontline get along, because one, the workplace is a lot better. We all know that. But two, the ideas seem to move better. They seem to be more collaborative. You get more investment. You get ideas that you could never think of when you were, doing it on your own. So with that said, when you allow for these divides based on assumptions to exist, the team starts to break it down into individuals who really are not spectacular on their own, but yet when they're part of a team, they become excellent. And I'm going to put it out there, guys. Even people with the greatest talents of the world still have to show some level of pro-social purpose. How does your talent help the team get better? So with that said, Joe, it does cause a team breakdown. At the end of the day, we lose out on being effective, correct? Because we're not communicating.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, without a doubt, because, in order to, a cohesive team is not based on just one individual effort. It's based on the individual effort of everybody collectively. And you're not going to have a well-oiled machine unless, you have a cohesive machine. And, when you have employees that have issues, yeah, I mean, at some point, it gets to a point where you have to sit them down to get it worked out, or worst case scenario, separate them, whatever, whatever the case is. But you can't let it go unchecked. You can't let it go, and hope that it works itself out. It's something that, as a leader, you have to eventually have to sit them down and find out what's going on, because, it could affect the overall production of the team. And that, that's something we don't want.
Yeah. And guys, this also, there's a thing here. I didn't use it here, but now I'm starting to see it in context. It says hard feelings, where assumptions can lead to hard feelings, which can foster discontent and complacency. If you put this in context, with what we just said, the divide and how it can cause a team breakdown. I mean, this kind of actually does fit in right into that, where if we make these assumptions and then we start turning those assumptions inward, starting to self-fulfill that prophecy, then we wind up not wanting to make the effort. We don't, because having said that, well, I believe Joe meant this, or I believe management meant this, or I believe the rehabilitation side meant this, or I believe the custody side meant this. So why bother? Why bother? It's like, wait a second. Did they tell you that? That's what I know. And I know, but did they tell you that? Because now we have a bigger concern. Now it's affecting your motivation, but really, who is really the one impacting your motivation? Is it, definitive that Joe meant that, or that management meant that, or that the rehabilitation side meant, or the customer, or is it something that you are now starting to filter through your own head and starting to make it fit that confirmation bias that we all have? And guys, this is very important dialogue, because having said that, I think the end result here is ultimately to be intentional with your efforts for clarity. And that crosses into what Joe mentioned. This can actually start leading into self-doubt, because I think that when you start making assumptions and they start to settle in, there's a lot of ambiguity in there. It's like, basically, I'm assuming Joe said that, or Joe meant that. Sorry. I know what Joe said. I'm assuming Joe meant this. Yeah, but you don't know. And now the problem is, if Joe didn't mean that, you may not move forward. You may decide, hey, if Joe's going to do it that way, I don't know. I'm not for it. It's like, yeah, but you haven't asked why. You don't know what's going on in Joe's head. So I do think it could lead to a lot of self-doubt, because that assumption is not based on any facts. It's just based on what you believe Joe's intent is, or Joe's motivation is. Would you agree with that, Joe?
Yeah, I mean, assumptions can lead to devastating and negative consequences. What's the old adage? If you split a assume into three parts, it makes an ass out of you and me. It's one of those where, when you just assume without, seeking clarity on the subject or from the individual, it can definitely have negative impacts.
Yeah, and guys, however you want to apply this generalized knowledge, I could think of many situations where we've all made assumptions. And I know, as management, if I find that there's assumption out there about my intent or my motive, I'm going to get right back down to the people and find out where that assumption's coming from, and then go ahead. And if it is an assumption that's against what I'm trying to push forward, I'm going to nip it immediately. So yes, I would like to think that people that are making the assumptions are going to make the effort to maybe figure it out, and let's go talk to Joe, let's go talk to the department, find clarity. But having said that, if they're not willing to do it, and you as on the other side of that assumption feels that there's something being assumed that is not your intent or not your motive, you better go out there and clear that up immediately, because you're going to need to counter influence that, because again, these are things that could ripple into the dynamic of the workplace. We also got to say this. Now, this I think is definitely very essential in corrections. There's a thing called the ladder of inference, or ladder of inferences. And it's Chris Argyris or Argyris. I think it's Argyris. His name gets me. But he came up with a ladder in which there's bad decision making. Or well, hold on. I'm using it for bad decision making. It's a ladder on how we make decisions. But if you look at the book, it kind of tells you where decisions can go bad depending on where you're at in the ladder. So there's 7 rungs on this ladder, and I want to read it real quick, and you'll see where assumption falls in. And this is essential for us, because assumptions can lead to really, really, really bad decision making. Just in context, when you don't know why something has to be done, that can cause you to make decisions that go into the wrong direction. So like, or you don't have buy-in. So Joe gives me a directive. He's my lieutenant. I'm not really feeling what Joe's about, but I guess I got to do it. You know, Joe's my boss. But having said that, if I don't understand the why and I go to make a decision on the floor that relates to what Joe wants, but maybe it starts to go sideways without me knowing why, I may make decisions that are not aligned with what Joe actually wants. So having said that, I may do what Joe wants on the surface, but I don't have a deeper meaning of what Joe really truly wants. So here I am doing as Joe tells me to do without truly understanding why Joe is telling me to do it. And then what happens here when I go to make a decision, I may make that decision filtered through my assumption of what I believe Joe may want and not actually what Joe wants. So having said that, when you look at this ladder of inference, it's pretty good. The first thing is that you're observing stuff. So you kind of look at what's in front of you, the facts, whatever's coming your way, what you can see. Then you got to add meaning to those facts, to what you're observing. Then you got to make assumptions based on those meanings. So now that's sort of where we're at. Then you got to draw conclusions based on those assumptions. So now we start to get a little further down the hill. Then you adopt beliefs based on those conclusions. And then you take actions based on those beliefs. And then instead of jumping to conclusions, what they tell you to do is you got to analyze and test the assumptions, meaning you got to make sure your data is correct, you're observing the right thing, seek clarity. And then it turns out to be, if you do this, it does wind up becoming a reflective loop, right? You interpret what's in front of you, whatever those assumptions are, those become conclusions. And if they're repeated patterns, those become what you believe in. And then eventually you get that loop where your beliefs tend to affect what the data you start to select over time. So basically, if I start going through this pattern, then I start seeing things based on that routine. And now, unfortunately, it's like that confirmation bias. I'm re-going through the same loop of just seeing things the way I want to see it. So at one point, when you start to get the facts, and let's say you got to make a decision, before you make assumptions, you got to make sure that you're clear on every angle so you can actually make decisions that matter. And I think the biggest part, as me and Joe mentioned, it's what cannot be seen. It's the stuff that cannot be seen that we make the assumption on instead of actually getting clarity. And it's also how we interpret what those facts are. And usually, again, that can't be seen. I don't know how Joe is seeing the reason behind his decisions. I don't know how he's processing the facts. I see things differently than Joe does. So what I got to do is I do got to speak to Joe, at one point to see how Joe is seeing the facts that are coming in, how's he's interpreting it, and why are you taking the actions in this route? Would you agree with that, John? And I like that ladder because it's true. It's that you got facts coming your way. These are things I see. These are things I observe contextually. This is how I'm making the decision based on those things. Now, after I make that decision, I make that conclusion. Now that becomes a belief. The more I do it, I start to believe in that. And then now, what are you doing now to go ahead and communicate why you believe that to, let's say, Joe or to another department?
Yeah, I mean, I've definitely seen bad decisions made on invisible inferences. One person given direction is an automatic assumption that the person that he's given that directive to is actually going to understand his total picture of why that decision, that directive was given, and that's not always the case. So yeah, I've seen invisible inferences lead to supervisors making bad decisions. Decisions that enacting these directives can cause impact on morale. The way things are carried out. And it's why it's always, and I'm definitely going to have to look at this ladder by Chris here, because that's something I'm interested in to Sharon. But the biggest the biggest thing is is just because you don't want to seem like you didn't understand the directive, seek the clarity anyway, because it's always better to seek the clarity and understand the actual total picture before you start making bad decisions.
Yeah, because it's the context that gives you a better chance to filter in case you got to make further decisions on what needs to be carried out. And the reason why I love this ladder, to be honest with you, is I think that we tend to lose out on, we interpret something our way, and then we tend to not maybe share it with others as to why we see it that way, because we're afraid or that we're going to be challenged, especially if you're an insecure leader, or vice versa. Because don't forget this, when Joe gives me a directive, there's a decision being made on my end on how I see that directive, so let's not lie about that, and why I see it that way. So now you got intent on both sides, you got motive on both sides, and they're assumed motives, assumed intentions, and then we're not communicating to find out what the reality is. So Joe gives me a directive. I assume what Joe means by that directive. Joe doesn't know how I'm taking that directive in. I mean, sometimes I'll go as far as saying, if Joe gave me the directive, it wouldn't hurt that in the translation of that directive, Joe tells me why he's giving me the directive. Now, granted, I don't know how that why is going to eventually be translated to the person receiving it, because they could just not like Joe. So they may not buy into Joe's why. But it's still a good effort forward by Joe, because maybe Joe's aware that, hey, I don't get along with Anthony. So he may not understand where I'm coming from with this. So let me call him in. Let me go ahead and tell him why I need this done. And let me go ahead and just really answer his questions to at least see if I can get the buy-in. Because I think that's the biggest concern here with assumptions. Assumptions ruin the chance, or negative assumptions ruin the chance of creating buy-in in what what needs to be done. In corrections, the orders that we have to pass down, I mean, I like to actually delegate authority. The only time I delegate tasks is when I don't get the buy-in from the individuals. If I can't get the buy-in, then maybe I have to delegate the task because I can't get the ownership from the individuals. But if I know they believe in it, and I know we're clear on why it has to happen, and they understand, then you could delegate the authority, because then you have the official buy-in. But usually if I know that this ain't going to pass well when I say this order or when I give this directive, because I know that staff can take it many different ways. I know there's a lot of people say, well, who cares how staff's going to take it? Go ahead and just tell them. No, I do care, because I want them to buy in. I want to delegate authority. I want them to be invested. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to bring them up to the table, and I'm going to figure out what all those assumptions are going to be, and then go ahead and get them aligned. Because that's another thing, Joe, and I'm sure you would agree with this. You could pass a directive out to the group without know why, and you can get agreement that it's going to be done, but you're not going to get the alignment. The alignment comes from removing those assumptions that are going to knock those people from the course, the real buy-in of doing what needs to be done. So having said that, I think the reason why you want to remove the assumption is because that's the only way you're going to get the alignment. That's the only way you're going to get people to be aligned, so you know that your influence is there even when you're not. I mean, would you agree with that, Joe?
Yeah, I mean, if you're not clear on your directive, you can give that same directive to 3 different people, and sometimes you're going to come back with 3 different results because you weren't clear on your directive, with any kind of clarity as to why or what we're looking for. And there's going to be times, especially in a correctional setting, where a directive's given, and it may be part of a confidential investigation. We can't always give you the clarity that you're seeking or needing. For example, I'd received information at one point that, and this was years ago, that, an inmate was possibly trying to circumvent his vent in his cell for an escape attempt. I sent one of my officers, who I knew was a definite contraband hound. And I told him, hey, I need you to go shake the cell down. I need you to go look for any kind of maintenance deficiencies. And, he asked me, well, what am I looking for in particular? I said, well, I can't really go into it because it's part of a confidential investigation, but I need you to go shake the cell down and let me know if you turn up with any kind of maintenance deficiencies. So, I was able to give him some sort of direction without giving total clarity because of the fact it was a confidential investigation. But sometimes that's going to happen. And folks need to understand that. But at the same time, the person issuing a directive has to give some sort of clarity, some sort of, definite true direction as to why, the directive is being said. But if you just issue a general order or a general directive to 3 different people, I mean, there's going to be times you get 3 different results because they don't know, especially if it's a basic directive, they don't know what they were looking for to begin with. So they just do it.
Well, you made a good point, because if there is a moment where, I mean, you could give clarity by telling someone, hey, this is all I can give you at this point. It may not be as definitive as they would like, but it gives clarity to why they may not be able to get all the information they need. Now, the funny thing about this is, though, my relationship with you matters on how I assume when there is something that I may not be able to know. So, like, if I get along with Joe and me and Joe are good, and Joe gave me that directive, I know Joe. I'm going to assume that Joe would want to give me that information. So there's nothing personal here, but he can't. But I'm still going to give 100% effort because Joe trusts me that my job, my function will probably figure it out anyway. I'm going to be honest with you. You didn't just pick anybody to do that search. You picked somebody you knew. So basically,
Absolutely.
It doesn't take them that long for them to figure out, through their specialized function, what Joe needs to get done. Trust me, you can give out an order to somebody that if you need something that really, I don't want to say performance punishment, but it does happen. If there's a heightened need for something that relates to safety and security, something, I guess for an example here, I may not want to just put anybody on it, especially because at this point here, I can't truly provide a lot of details as to why it's not being done. I mean, why it's being done. I could tell you what needs to be done, but you may ask why, and that's where the assumption lies. The assumption lies in the why and how it's answered. So now, if I'm not able to give a clear why, which could affect one buy-in, which could affect the person's way of doing things, I'm going to get someone that I know does the job well, but also that I know has a good rapport with me, because that's very important. And then when I communicate with that person, the moment I say, hey, listen, this is what I need. I trust in your efforts. That's why I'm picking you, because it is a bit of a priority right now. And the reason why I'm choosing you over someone else is not performance punishment, but I'm very limited into telling you why it has to be done at this moment. And I know that you do your job excellent anyway. So at this point, the buy-in is just the fact that this is who you are. You buy into the work. But the reason why I'm also picking you is because if I could tell you, I would. So you're not making any negative assumptions that are usually not based on what you're being assigned, but rather based on how you view me. And that person goes in, does what they got to do, and it's a good translation. So I think at that time like that too, Joe, that's a good time where you want to get someone who knows the job, because if I can't explain the why, and I know that why could be used for buy-in and a higher level of clarity, like we mentioned, then I may want to choose somebody I trust, because I know that they're going to carry it out, even if they don't know the why, because the why is internal for them, so they can meet in the middle. And then also they know that we have a good rapport. Therefore, I'm not hiding something from them intentionally. I'm actually, letting them know at this point I can't, but as I said, trust and believe, they figure it out. Once they go in there and they start doing their job, they come back and they say, hey, Joe, was the guy trying to make an escape? Is that what was going on? Because I noticed these things. So, and it's funny, I will say this. In some cases, when they don't come back knowing exactly why something had to be done, I may ask, the person in charge of that information, hey, we may have to bring this person in, because I have a feeling they could do more if they know why. And then you got to see if we're able to do that. So there may be a first initial attempt where just there's limited information, but if you get someone that's not producing, and they usually would, and maybe you feel that the lack of clarity is preventing that, then you may ask, hey, listen, I can't do this on my own. I think I need to fill this person in, because I think if they're more targeted, they know exactly what they're looking for. But right now, I'm not going to be able to trust 100% effort, because I'm not giving this person enough direction. I mean, so you could try it a little the one way. But I like what that was a good point, Joe. I thought that. Anything there before we move on to the next one?
Yeah, and that's why a good working relationship is always beneficial because, even though you can't give them the total clarity, if you have a good working relationship with your staff, when you issue something like that, if they know the type of person you are and the type of supervisor you are, they're automatically going to know that you're looking for something, but you just can't tell them. So they'll tend to go in there and look a little harder than they normally do and dig a little deeper. So, it's a good working relationship is a beautiful thing to have.
And if you can trust them in the why, they know where to put their energy. Because I'd rather have energy 100% focused at that point than just spread out and in areas where they don't need to be. But again, sometimes that may not be up to us. But that's where good relationships matter.
Absolutely.
That's where Joe will talk to me, and it's more about Joe and Gangi. And I don't consider this performance punishment, because if I'm limited with what I can tell or tell Joe, but I still need Joe to be successful, I'm definitely going to want somebody that knows how to navigate around ambiguity. I do. And then someone that I'm going to trust is going to put the effort in, even when they don't know why. And that's for someone I know that wants to do the job for the right reasons. Because here's another thing, Joe. I'm able, when we're disenfranchised and staff may be a little upset or discontent, I try to look back and try to connect with things that I know can connect with them. So I do use an internal why, something that can motivate them to do the job. But there are some people that just love the job, love the work. It's in who they are. They're going to give 100% effort regardless. So at that time, when I can't use the why to push them forward, I may look for someone who already has it. And then go and said, hey, listen, I really can't give you much right now, but I need this done. And I may not need to provide them with a clarity or a why to motivate them, because at this point here, they're fueled. But with that said, if they don't come up and you're expecting something, and this is a person that given the exhausted effort, you may need to try to bring that person in, because, now at this point here, you really got to direct their energy. So that at that point, a why may be better. But again, it really depends on, what it is that you're trying to seek. Sometimes we could do things just, hey, send them out there just for the catch-all, for the liability's sake, whatever it is. But if you're really targeting something, I truly believe that the people that are needed may have to know, because that's going to motivate them. So again, if you're looking for something specific, the people that are involved in it may have to know, or else they may not, utilize their energy properly. And if they do know, that can help bring back actual evidence. So what we also, this kind of went right into it. Loss of motivation. Assumptions can make people feel like there's no point, which can lead to a loss of motivation. We kind of talked about, writing charges and the charges not being supported. And basically we're chasing outcome over effort. And then we've done discussions before on why charges may be needed regardless of what the outcome is, the documented effort, whatever it is. I mean, we talked about that. But I think if we have a confirmation bias that goes towards the negative, and we start making assumptions that are geared towards the negative, something that fits our picture, our self-fulfilling prophecy, what happens is we will wind up demotivating ourselves. And therefore, that's going to be a problem, because now the effort is not there. That's why I said in management, if you feel that there's a chance for a negative assumption to carry weight, because the person on the floor may have the greater influence or whatever it is, however that person has weight to pass that assumption across, that generalized assumption, whether it's against a department, against what's left or right, against top down, whatever it is, the rank, the structure. The problem is, once they start to internalize that, and that becomes the way they see things, that is going to affect their energy, their output. Like, granted, Joe gives me a directive. I don't like Joe. I assume Joe's motive is A, B, C, D, which is totally against what I agree with. But I'm not going to tell Joe. I'm just not going to give Joe the effort. I'm just going to go out there and, whatever it is. But now here, granted, now let's say Russ, he gives me an order and I like Russ. Same exact order Joe gave me, but I like Russ. And I know Russ would never throw me under the bus and all this other stuff. And I'm going to go ahead and give Russ everything. That's why in some cases here, you got some people that produce more for others. You can get Joe, who's this lieutenant who, can't get people to be productive at all. And then you get Russ, who gets, everyone to produce for him. And most of the time it's funny, but when you come down to it, there's going to be either some miscommunication or some generalized assumptions of how Joe is, or the reason behind why Joe does what he does, as opposed to Russ is that stand tall guy. Guys, Joe, this makes a lot of sense. Think about this, Joe. You mentioned it before with the administrator, but if I could kind of further maybe have a deal. When you have a supervisor or a leader or whatever, just people working together as a unified team that we know we stand up for each other. When something has to be done, sometimes we don't even have to communicate the why because people already bought in. It's not so much what needs to be done, but I bought into the individual who's giving me the order. So basically, I bought into Russ because Russ always has our back. What do you need, Russ? What do you need? What do you need? I got you. And then you go ahead and you do what you can because you know Russ has your back. So there's no room for negative assumption. And even if there is, everybody on the ground knows Russ is a guy that got your back. So the moment you go to say something, there's enough counter influence on the floor that's going to go ahead and say, Russ? No way. And you just got enough of a way where that negative assumption doesn't settle in. It just doesn't settle in. But then you get Joe, who's not well liked, who again, tries to, give out an order, and you don't get that productivity. Again, it's because Joe doesn't say much. He doesn't speak up any concerns. He doesn't really advocate for the people that he leads. So when Joe gives an order, Joe has to try to explain the why more than Russ would, but no one's buying into Joe's why because it's just Joe doesn't care about us. So Joe's going to tell us some bullshit because that's what Joe does, because he's more concerned about the work getting done because he doesn't have a relationship with his people, where Russ can get the productivity because Russ got the relationship with his people. So the assumption for Russ goes towards the positive, which gets the people to work more for him. And then Joe's goes towards the negative because Joe goes right from being the boss to right to productivity without going through building relationships in the middle. So now people don't produce, and we'll probably get to production, but people don't produce, but more importantly, they're not motivated because, to be honest with you, I think the person that oversees them, the person above, is the true beacon in some cases of their motivation. People don't leave agencies, they leave people. So I think that if I have to work, if I have to give you above and beyond my position, what it tells me to do, because you have to in corrections, no lie. But don't get me wrong, if I don't like you, I'm only going to play my position. It's just, hey, I got a union or whatever it is, I'm only going to do what I'm told to do. But with that said, if I look for motivation or inspiration, sometimes I look at the person who's giving me the order. If I don't have it inside, and I'm asking, why do you think they're doing this? And for Russ only got to tell me once, and I'm already golden. But for Joe, you could tell me till you're blue in the face, Joe. I don't believe you. And at the end of the day, neither is anybody on the floor. So you are not going to get the proper motivation to go ahead and one, do whatever's needed. But also, if times are challenging, people will work more for Russ as opposed to Joe. Would you agree with that? I know we're going to cross into productivity next, but would you agree with that when it comes to motivation as well?
Oh yeah, absolutely. I mean, I've seen supervisors, destroy their own shifts due to lack of loss of motivation due to lack of communication. It happens all the time, and I mean, it's not just the COs, or I mean, hell, I've even had loss of motivation at the lieutenant level. From people above me, because you have two different majors and they're both on opposite ends of the spectrum. One was a go hard and do anything for you and be in the trenches with you after they issue the order, and the other one's just do as I say, not as I do. And yeah, absolutely, the loss of motivation can definitely be there when you're not clear and intent and involved with your people.
Yeah, and obviously motivation connects to productivity. But I want to mention something, and this matters to me too. So we're kind of blending both these, and that will leave us with one more at the end. So I mean, motivation does lead to productivity. But I want to mention something here because I don't want to leave us hanging. How we view ourselves or how we think people view us matter. So if Russ got positive momentum going. He knows he's respected. He does enough effort to know that he's respected, because he's advocating for his people. He's doing what's got to be done, and the people see him in a very good light. Russ is constantly communicating with his people, so Russ knows how people view him, and which matters. It matters. But now Joe is avoidant of his staff because he knows staff may not like him. So what he's doing, he just tries to avoid talking to him. He just passes things down the chain and just without caring if there's buy-in or whatever it is. Where Russ automatically got the buy-in because they buy into the individual before they buy into their vision. So Russ got the buy-in. Joe doesn't. But instead of Joe trying to figure out why he doesn't have the buy-in, Joe just kind of sends things down the chain, and eventually what happens is the work becomes overwhelming, becomes tedious, because at the end of the day, the people don't see the purpose behind it. They just see Joe, who they don't get along with, and they automatically assume Joe's motives or intent is just, he's just pissing us off, or he's not playing his role, whatever it is. So I think it's very important for us to know how we're viewed, for one, because if we feel that there's a chance that we're not viewed in a positive light, I need to change that immediately, because assumptions will go towards the negative. So then if I'm passing out something, I need to talk to people to make sure, as I mentioned before, that we spell out our motive, spell out our intent, because I can't assume that that's going to go in my favor. I can't, not like Russ can. Russ can give out an order and it'd be easily accepted because Russ got momentum going in his direction. Russ can always assume at this point that the people will take the order. And if they don't, Russ could assume that someone will come back to him and ask a question. I mean, that's another part of what Russ can safely assume. Russ can safely assume if I do pass something that they may not in agreement with, my door's open. They can come to me. I can clarify it and keep my momentum going. Just keep it going. Joe, unfortunately, they don't talk to Joe either. So that's another thing. So now Joe, at this point, in order to encourage dialogue, Joe's got to be more intentional because he's the one in which the assumptions are going against. So Joe has to make an intentional effort to go ahead and talk to the staff or talk to where the assumptions are coming from, because you can't expect them to come to you because you don't have momentum going that way. And again, this is generalized to a hierarchy, but it could travel personality conflict. It could travel cross-functional, however you want to look at it. But Joe can't assume that people are going to come to him because they haven't before. They won't now. So Joe may have to make the intentional effort to go to his staff to keep on giving them whys that they can connect to, whys that can give them some validation, not justification, just some validation. But with that said, and I'm not really putting this on front line, but just another perspective. If you do have a supervisor that's conflict avoidant, if you do have a supervisor that doesn't actively engage, I don't think that you should sit in with negative assumptions either and start accepting your interpretation of why this person's giving you order. Why is Joe giving it to me? I don't understand, because, because at the same time, Russ is also giving you similar orders. But at the end of the day, the assumptions are different. They shouldn't be different. They're similar in nature, the orders themselves. So I think at this point here, maybe you guys should maybe make an effort to speak to that supervisor. Do I think it's your responsibility? Yeah, I do. I'm going to go ahead and say yes, and I'll tell you why. And maybe Joe, okay, because at the end of the day, we got to have purpose. And whether Joe's giving us or not, I think it's good for us to see clarity so we know what we're doing and we could be better decision makers. Now, granted, I think Joe is the primary source of accountability for that. I do, 100%. But I think that actually, I would go ahead and say Joe is the ultimate source of accountability for clarity. I will say that. But you, as a frontline person, are the primary source of accountability, because that's between you and between your peers. So if Joe decides that he doesn't want to, just wants to give out orders, have an easy day, and and avoid conflict, I think then you're going to have to bring those discussions to him in an effort, one, to get clarity, but two, start engaging so we can start building trust and maybe influence up. But again, there's a lot there, Joe. But I definitely think it matters in regards to eliminating the power of negative assumptions. So I think for Russ, as we said, he's got it going. He's got the momentum going. If they have a question, he has a door open and he just keeps it fueled. The other person tends to want to be conflict avoidant, so doesn't leave the door open. People don't want to go to him, and they just think it's easier to just send out orders without clarity. And next thing you know, the assumptions are taken off like crazy. Your staff don't have buy-in, which means that they're only doing just enough. And who knows if they're doing it, they may be doing an agreement, but are they aligned? What's your thoughts on that, Joe? Because there's a lot there.
Yeah, ultimately it's up to each individual to go seek that clarity, regardless whether you're frontline staff or supervision. Let's just say the roles reversed and Gangi gives me an order. I don't quite buy into it. I don't know Gangi. I've heard all these negative things, so I'm not buying into it. And weeks down the line, I get that question and I, I'm just going to go talk to Gangi and find out, what the hell is going on. And I go talk to Gangi and after a sit down and one-on-one, you find out that your assumptions are totally wrong in his directives and his vision and where things are going. At that point, even if Gangi isn't the best communicator to his shift or staff or employees, that's where you can go back as the individual and say, hey guys, what I thought about Gangi is it's wrong. This is what he's actually looking for. This is what he truly wants. And, at that point you can be the one to change that divide and bring everybody together. It takes everybody's individuality to go seek that clarity. And sometimes you can be that messenger that changes the motivational factor of that shift.
Well, you want to hear something funny too in what you're mentioning. That's why sometimes you may have somebody that says, hey, you know what? Let's say I'm Joe. Hey, Russ, you think you could tell him this order for me? Like, you think you can go ahead and send this down to the troops, send it down to the trenches, because I may not be the one to. I disagree with that. If I was Russ, I'd be like, well, Joe, we'll do this together, but you gotta. You're going to have to, this is something that you got to pass down. You're going to have to communicate that downwards. If you don't do that long-term, this won't work. So I agree with that. I think it literally is something that we should think about, because at the end of the day, this goes beyond the directive, because the assumptions ruin the buy-in. It may not ruin the actual work that the specific work of that surface stuff that has to be done, but it relates buy-in to the ownership of the work, which allows for things to be done that you may not know about. That's the innovation side. So you can get Joe, who no one likes, and they'll do the job, but then you can get Russ where they go above and beyond and they do more. And it's the more where the success is. So again, the assumption could affect the buy-in, which could affect innovation. It all comes around full circle. And the last one is a retention issue. I'll have Joe start off on that one, Joe. What do you got, Joe?
Retention issues. That's assumptions. I've seen assumptions cause massive retention issues just based on one person's beliefs that everybody starts to buy in without seeking clarity. I've seen people jump ship. I've seen people it's unbelievable what kind of retention issues that you can see take place behind. And it just starts off with one person's assumptions without seeking any kind of clarity. I've seen one person's assumptions just spread through a shift like wildfire and cause people to change shifts, cause people to quit, cause people to retire. I mean, I've seen it all. Individual beliefs that are your own are one thing, but when you start spreading those amongst the shift or amongst your employee ranks, you can definitely cause retention issues because other people start buying in. And again, it's your fault and it's their fault for not going to that person one-on-one and seeking the clarity that you need. It's unbelievable the amount of retention issues I've seen behind false assumptions.
Yeah, and guys, it's like that. Why don't you come to me? Yeah, I mean, obviously, the main part of this dialogue is assumptions are going to have to be, if you want to rid assumptions, you're going to have that dialogue, which at first could look like it's going to be conflict, but at the end, it could be on the way to generate trust. But you got to get through that first layer, which unfortunately a lot of people don't do. They rather sit in comfort with those negative assumptions than really having the courage to face the individual and saying, hey, this is what's being said. This is how the troops feel. And it goes both ways. As I said, the people that think of the assumption or the people that are the assumptions being made of or on, there's intentional effort both ways to meet in the middle. I would expect, I expect a 50-50. I mean, if I assume, or because Joe may be in a leadership position, I do expect a little more from him because his job is to keep the team motivated. His job is to make sure that he's got the team being productive. He's got buy-in. He's got all that stuff. So I do put a lot of pressure on Joe in this scenario. But if you have cross-functional concerns or concerns that aren't defined by a hierarchy, but rather what's left or right of you, both of you parties got to go. But I would also say that even if I have a bad relationship with Joe and he's my boss, I mean, come on, let's man up. Let's go up and figure out what this is, and let's not be part of this gossip where we start to slowly accept that. One of the things that we discuss in the show, and we kind of touched on it briefly here, is that self-fulfilling prophecy. At the end of the day, we start believing it, we start accepting it, we start creating it. Why not? But then when you create it yourself, when someone asks you what the hell's going on here, you create it yourself and then you blame other people. And then it's like, well, hold on. What did you just say? Wait a second. Did you at least at any moment bring this concern to management or bring this concern? Well, got to have a discussion because you guys are going down the wrong path. And I will guarantee you nobody in their right mind would want to see this. So having said that, and that to me is another thing real quick. When we start fulfilling that prophecy, the self-fulfilling side, all of a sudden these assumptions get carried out to these extremes that are so ridiculous in context. But having said that, because we lived on these assumptions so long and we let the assumptions grow, because it originated on a foundation of, let's say that's what Joe's perspective is, not because we've ever asked Joe, but because I don't like Joe, so I'm going to assume that's what Joe wants. I'm going to assume that's Joe's motive. And then all of a sudden, inch by inch, that assumption starts to carry more weight, starts to get bigger and bigger and bigger to the point where we got no order or chaos. It's no order. It's strictly chaos. And all of a sudden, when someone walks into unit and sees what the end result of this wild assumption was that grew from an inch to miles, you could see it on the unit in miles, and you go to talk to the officer, you go talk to someone and say, hey, whoa, what is going on here? Go speak to management. Go speak to management. At any point, did management tell you to do A, B, C, D, E? No. Then how the hell do we have A, B, C, D, and E up there right now? Oh, well, because a couple of weeks ago, I'm not lying. A couple of weeks ago, we had a concern. Instead of me pretty much asking Joe what he meant by that, we made this assumption, and every decision we have made based on what should have been Joe's order, but we don't know Joe's why, has been filtered through our why, through our assumption, which has not been positive. It's been negative. And now the end result is our interpretation of what Joe wanted. There it is, all up in front of us. So we never made clarity into what Joe wanted. So all we did was make an interpretation. So the funny thing is what you see in front of you is not the end result of Joe or bad management. It's the end result of what you assumed what they wanted. And now you put it back on management, and then there's a divide again because management will come back and say, whoa, hold on. I never said any of this. I never wanted any of that. Where the hell did that come from? And then again, it can go back to management. Did you know that there was an assumption being carried out that you let get carried out, and to the point where all the decisions that were being made are based on that negative assumption? I mean, am I right, Joe? Is that extreme, or come on, man?
Yeah, no, that's on point. I mean, it happens all the time. Just off the most basic of directives, without giving any kind of clarity and letting one person take that directive with their own assumptions. I've seen it more times than not, and 9 times out of 10, it didn't end well.
But you know what sucks about that, Joe, too, is when you look at that, the first thing you would say, especially if you're being blamed for that, let's say now Joe is being blamed, then that's not, there's nothing in Joe's order that said that for that to happen. Now Joe gets off his ass. He goes down there and says, why didn't any one of you fuckers see me?
Right.
How the hell did this happen? Because now I'm being called down and everybody assumes this is what I wanted, all because I told you. And it's going to be something.
How did a simple cell search turn into a massive use of force with major injuries and a fucking hospital run? Where the fuck? I just wanted to know if the guy's vent was loose. What the fuck?
Yeah, but you're right. So the biggest problem is when it comes to that, what we talked about that is when you start assuming towards the negative, what's going to wind up happening is you're going to make decisions based on the wrong assumption contextually. And now the problem is you're headed in the whole wrong direction. And then when you're headed in the wrong direction, you don't even take onus for that. You know, you never sought clarity. You never understood what that person meant. And now we're in the wrong direction. And at the end of the day, the first time someone confronts you with it, you're going to go back and try to explain about some order that Joe gave you weeks ago, which now you don't realize you have built a negative assumption as to why Joe gave you that order has now become the foundation for future decision-making. So now we're making decisions based on that negative assumption. And then all of a sudden, when we talk about things that disconnect, you know, you got something here, you go to the unit and you're like, holy shit, what am I seeing here? And someone goes back to that original, let's say, decision that you made. And it's like, man, either they needed more clarity on what they were supposed to get at, or they went ahead and took everything and went on their own. And it's like, wow, guys, when we're empowering decision making, you want to make sure that you're empowering decision making on proper clarity and not negative assumptions. That's why, again, in Joe's case here, it goes both ways, but if I have to focus more on Joe, if I'm delegating task, it's because I may be unclear of the clarity of it all, or I can't share the clarity, whatever it is. But when I delegate authority, I need to ensure that the parameters, the clarity, that people understand it. And if there's a negative assumption somewhere along the line where I have delegated authority to or delegated empowerment, I better get the hell on that, because those negative assumptions are going to be empowered. So now you got decisions that are being filtered through that negative assumption. So you got to be careful that when you delegate empowerment, you're not delegating into an environment that negatively assumes your intent or your motives. Would you agree? Would you agree with that?
Oh, yeah. You know, I've seen directives have some bad consequences, especially when they're delegated out of anger. You know what I mean? Yeah, you just got your ass chewed by somebody higher than you, and you go back and you delegate something, you know, give a directive out of anger, and you're not clear and you don't have the parameters set when you issue that directive, man. I've been there, done that.
Yeah. Hey, Joe, you have anything that you would like to say in close? It was a good topic, I thought.
Yeah, I mean, you know, again, communication is key. Don't, you know, like I said at the beginning of the show, when you split assume down the center, it makes an ass out of you and me. So never assume anything about anybody. You know, seek direction, seek clarity, you know, it doesn't hurt to just go talk to somebody one-on-one. You'll find out that, you know, a lot of your beliefs are misplaced after talking to a person. You know, and that goes for either side, leadership or frontline. You know, somebody has to be the bigger person and go find out what's going on, regardless if you're a lieutenant and you need to find out what's going on between two officers, or you have an officer that has misplaced conceptions about you. You know, it doesn't hurt for that officer to say, hey, Lou, you got a minute? I need to talk to you. You know, just a 10-minute conversation can alleviate years worth of misconceptions. So, you know, don't ever let that kind of shit build up to where, you know, you start seeing a divide in your team. You know, it could lead to devastating consequences, you know, not just in productivity, morale, you know, it could just lead to just bad things. All it takes is somebody to open their mouth for 5 minutes to alleviate all that. So.
And it's funny because the conversation went from morale to productivity and then back to morale again, because ultimately productivity and morale are definitely connected, as you can see in the scenarios we did between Russ and Joe. But guys, this also assumptions do destroy. I mean, at the end of the day, you got to have those face-to-face dialogues, even if it's going to cause conflict at the beginning. It's not personal. Conflict literally should be over issues and ideas that we should have enough trust to discuss. And whether we agree or not, we do want alignment. And at the end, once we know we're all committed because we're able to have those conflicts, we're able to have those discussions, like Pat Lincioni would say, then we can draw true accountability from each other. And I think that's where this dialogue also matters. Who's accountable for the effort to remove assumption? I would say both, at an equal level. But at one point, it could lean on either side. I get it. I mean, it could be more situational. But why even ask that question? Just do it. Just if there's something that you need. And you got to ask yourself, too, I think when you receive information, how much of what you're receiving is being interpreted through what you feel and not what actually is there, what actually is not factual. And again, if you're a leader and you have good self-awareness and you know how you're viewed, you may require more effort in translating what needs to be done. And the last thing I want to mention, guys, and I guess this really isn't discussed as much as it should, but assumptions besides morale but this actually it does connect to productivity and morale. It's in the middle of it all, because I do think it's in the middle of it all, is the buy-in. Buy-in's all part of that. And I think that assumptions destroy the chance for buy-in, which allows for people to operate as if they own something as opposed to just working for somebody. As a leader, I always look to delegate, as I said, empowerment and ownership, because I want people to see things as their own so they do what's best for it. That keeps them invested. They're making decisions on something that is theirs to make decisions on. But again, that comes with clarity and just a way to let them know what it is that they're doing and the greater purpose it serves. But having said that, when you don't have that clarity or you don't have that buy-in because you have the assumptions that are going all over the place, people don't take ownership, they don't take investment, and they just do what they're told to do, and then everything else around it can fall apart, and they'll just say, well, you only told me to do A. I didn't do B and C. But then when you get like just an example, we did Russ and Joe. Russ, you give them an order, and they're going to do A, B, C, D, E, F, G, H, I, J, all the way down to the alphabet. But Joe, who was miserable to them, hey, you told me A, I did A. And then you want to hold them responsible for B, but you didn't tell me what you really wanted. You didn't tell me why you wanted it. So I went ahead and just did A, and I thought it was weird. I thought it wouldn't work out. And that's where I think it's on you too. Like when you start to realize that you're interpreting something, I mean, this is very general here. But if I could think of a scenario that would motivate one party to make more of an effort than the other in their intentionality, I would say as a manager, if you're self-aware, or even in general, if, when it comes to communication, whether it's cross-functional or top-down, whatever it is, or bottom-up, whatever it is, when you're well aware of how that other person can see you because you're self-aware, which we should be, then you may have to provide more clarity and stuff as to why. If not, they'll interpret they'll filter your motive and intent based on how they see you. So that's one aspect. So if you know that Joe doesn't see me in a good light, and I got to talk to Joe, I may spend more time with Joe explaining my motive and my intent, so I can at least hopefully deter that filter that Joe's going to put that in. But if I was the front line, if I see something that, and guys, this is a wide generality. I don't know if this really applies. Maybe it's something to help see if there's ever a point where the intentionality should come from one side or the other, which I still believe it should be both meeting in the middle. But if that said, if I had to hold accountability to one side or the other, as I said, the one accountability for management would be knowing how people see you, and then making the effort to build trust. And then if I would say for the front line up or whatever it is, the person receiving the information before they make the assumption, I would say if you get in something that as you filter is in total conflict of something that you feel that this person wouldn't want. I mean, honestly, guys, like if I'm working with Joe and Joe's my lieutenant, and he starts giving me orders that I feel are against safety and security, because I don't know his why and I'm assuming it, I need to talk to him. Because if I start doing that and it does violate safety and security, and I go back and I try to blame Joe for it, Joe's like, what are you talking about? Who the hell told you to do all that? So you need to seek that clarity immediately. As always, guys, the show's Tear Talk. If you haven't, please subscribe, interact, engage, comment, hit that bell. Bell's going to notify you every time I post a video. Stay safe.